Your heart stops. For a moment, nothing dramatic happens. The room looks the same, your body looks the same. But inside you, the most important countdown of your life has already started. The first thing that disappears is pressure. A second ago, your heart was pushing blood through thousands of miles of vessels. Now the pump is gone. Blood is no longer moving with force. Oxygen is no longer being delivered. But your brain does not shut off instantly. For the first few seconds, it is still running on what is left. The last scraps of energy already waiting in the system. So if your final thought was halfway formed, it may still be there. For a few seconds, you are still you. Then the brain begins to notice. Around 10 seconds after the heart stops, the organ that needs oxygen the most starts losing the supply it depends on. This is usually when consciousness disappears. From the outside, this is the moment people think you are gone. But from the inside, the story may not be that simple. In 2023, researchers at the University of Michigan described something unexpected in the brains of dying patients. They were looking at electrical activity directly. What they expected was a fade-out. A dying brain should become quieter, less organized, less alive. But in some patients, after oxygen was removed, the brain did the opposite. It surged. Not everywhere, but for a short time, areas linked to conscious processing showed bursts of high-frequency activity, including gamma waves, the kind often associated with awareness, attention, memory, and dreaming. That does not prove a soul leaves the body. It does not prove an afterlife. But it does destroy the simple idea that death is just a clean fade to black. Because at the edge of death, the brain may not only shut down, it may fight back. And that could explain why people who come back from cardiac arrest sometimes describe experiences that sound impossible. They talk about floating above the room, hearing voices, seeing light, feeling peace, watching scenes from their life return with unreal clarity. The important thing is not to jump to the easy answer. Maybe they are something science has not learned how to measure yet. The honest answer is, we do not know. But we do know this. The dying brain is not as boring as we once thought. 30 seconds after the heart stops, the body is in trouble. Blood is no longer carrying oxygen to the tissues. Cells that depended on oxygen begin switching to emergency chemistry. It produces acid. The muscles start to lose control, the jaw may loosen, the face may soften, the pupils can widen, because a body can look still long before every part of it is finished. Some cells die quickly, others last longer. Skin cells, muscle cells, bone cells. Death is not one event spreading evenly through the body. It is a collapse moving at different speeds through different systems. The brain is urgent. The skin is slower. At about 1 minute, there is still a narrow window where everything depends on intervention. If CPR begins, if blood flow is restored, if oxygen reaches the brain again soon enough, this process can sometimes be reversed. But without help, the window shrinks fast. After several minutes without oxygen, brain cells begin suffering damage that may become permanent. The longer the brain goes without oxygen, the less likely the person returns as the same person. Death is not always instant, but it becomes less reversible with every minute. And while that is happening, something else begins. The body cools. During life, warmth is not just something you have, it is something you constantly produce. When the system stops, the heat is no longer replaced. The body begins moving toward the temperature of the room. Then gravity takes over. Blood is no longer being pushed upward, downward, and around. The pump stopped. The fluid settled. Physics replaced biology. A few hours later, the body changes again. The muscles stiffen. This is called rigor mortis, and the reason it happens is stranger than most people expect. Muscles need energy not only to move, but also to release. When that energy disappears, tiny structures inside the muscle fibers lock in place. So the body becomes rigid, not because it is still trying to move, but because it has lost the power to let go. That stiffness does not last forever. As the body breaks down, the locked muscle structures break down too. And this is when the process becomes less like a machine turning off and more like an ecosystem waking up. Because after death, your body is no longer controlled by you. It is controlled by chemistry, bacteria, temperature, moisture, and time. The bacteria that lived inside your gut during life do not disappear when you die. They remain. But their role changes. During life, they helped digest your food. After death, they begin helping digest you. Cells start breaking open. Enzymes leak. Tissues lose structure. Gases form. The body begins returning its stored energy to the world. This sounds horrifying because we are used to thinking of the body as a person, a face, a voice, a name. But nature also sees the body as material: carbon, water, nitrogen, minerals, energy. The same things that once became a heartbeat will eventually become soil, insects, plants, and other living things. The body does not disappear. it changes form. But that still leaves the hardest question. What happens to consciousness? This is the part where science has to become very careful. We can measure a heartbeat, we can measure oxygen, we can measure brain activity, we can interview people who nearly died and came back, but we cannot interview someone who crossed the line permanently. So when people say they know exactly what happens after death, they are usually speaking from belief. Maybe they are right, maybe they are wrong, but science does not get to pretend certainty where it does not have evidence. When the brain can no longer support consciousness, the measurable experience of being you appears to end. But whether anything exists beyond that is not something current instruments can prove, and that is why death feels different from every other subject. Most mysteries become smaller when we study them. Death becomes more precise, but not smaller. But the final second from the inside remains locked. Does it feel instant? Does time stretch? Does the brain create one final dream so intense that it feels like another world? No one can answer that for everyone. But near-death survivors often return with one disturbing pattern. They do not talk about money, status, or winning arguments. Many talk about ordinary moments, people they loved, things they ignored, small memories they did not know their brain had kept. That may be the most unsettling possibility of all. Not that your life flashes before your eyes as a highlight reel, but that your brain kept everything. The room you forgot, the face you passed, the afternoon you thought meant nothing. And at the end, some part of you may open the archive. Maybe that is only the brain under stress. Maybe it is something deeper. Because if the final moments are filled with memory, then your life is being recorded right now, not by a camera, not by the world, but by you. The way someone said your name, the light in a kitchen, the last conversation you almost skipped. You may not remember these things tomorrow, but your brain might. So what happens after we die? First, the heart stops pushing blood. Then the brain runs out of oxygen. Then consciousness, as far as we can measure it, disappears. Then the body cools, stiffens, softens, and returns to chemistry. But somewhere between the first lost heartbeat and the final silence, there may be one last burst of activity, one last attempt by the brain to make sense of everything, one last flood of memory, one last world built from the life you already lived. And maybe that is why death is so frightening. Not because it is only darkness, but because before the darkness, there may be a mirror. And what you see in it depends on what you did while the lights were still on.